Okay, so have you ever had that feeling? Like, there's something you really should be doing or maybe even want to be doing, but you just can't seem to get started.
You're just stuck.
Yeah, completely stuck. It's like there's this invisible anchor holding you back, and even just the thought of starting is exhausting.
Oh, absolutely. I think we've all been there.
Heck.
That feeling of inertia is so common.
Mm.
And what's interesting is that we so often label it as laziness.
Right. Like
Yeah.
we just shrug and say, well, I guess I'm just lazy. But what we're going to deep dive into today is, well, is that really true? We've been looking at some really insightful ideas about what's really going on when we feel that way, especially because we know you're working on learning French, right?
Yeah.
And one of the most fascinating things that came out of these materials we've been looking at is this idea that often it's not actually laziness at all.
Mm.
It's more about feeling totally overwhelmed by whatever it is we're facing, maybe just being plain tired or even just not knowing where to even begin.
Yeah, I think that's a much more nuanced and, frankly, a much more helpful way to look at it.
Yeah.
Because if we just write ourselves off as lazy,
Yeah.
that doesn't really give us a path forward, does it?
No, it doesn't. It just makes us feel worse.
Right.
So our mission today is to kind of unpack those real reasons behind that feeling of stuckness and give you some really practical strategies to actually break free from it. Like no more hitting your head against that wall of inaction when it comes to your French studies or anything else for that matter.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's dig into this idea of laziness a bit more. Because as I mentioned, a lot of the stuff we've been reading really pushes back against that idea of it just being a character flaw,
Right.
like this inherent part of who we are.
Yeah, and there was one idea in particular that really stuck out to me. And it's this idea that what we often perceive as a desire to avoid something difficult, it actually comes from a kind of protective instinct. Yeah. Our brains are actually wired to try and steer us away from things that seem too big or too challenging because they're trying to conserve energy.
It's like when you know you should be practicing your French verb conjugations, right? But suddenly reorganizing your sock drawer seems like the most pressing thing in the world.
Exactly. That is the perfect example of what we're talking about, right? Like your brain is saying, hey, let's go for that easy win instead of that huge mountain of verb conjugations. It's basically choosing the path of least resistance.
Yeah, so it's like that immediate reward of tidying your sock drawer. It kind of gives us this little hit of dopamine, a little bit of relief from that bigger, scarier task, right?
Absolutely. And I think it's important to point out that this avoidance, it doesn't just stop there, right? It often leads to feelings of guilt, like, oh, I should be doing this. Why am I not doing this? And then ironically, that guilt can actually make the original task feel even more daunting.
Oh, it's a vicious cycle.
It really is. It just keeps us stuck in this loop of procrastination.
So how do we break free, especially, when we're talking about something like learning French?
Well, one of the most powerful strategies we came across is actually really simple. It's the idea of starting incredibly small.
Okay.
And I mean really small.
Yeah.
Like instead of trying to do a whole hour of French study, maybe just commit to opening your textbook and looking at one single vocabulary word.
Just one word.
Just one word.
It's like tricking your brain, right? You
Yeah,
make the task seem so tiny that it doesn't even register as an effort.
right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is that once you've taken that first tiny step,
Yeah.
you often find that the momentum just kind of carries you forward.
Oh, yeah. It's that initial hurdle that's the hardest to clear.
It is. And, there's even a scientific basis for this. It's called the Zygarnik effect.
Oh, tell me about this.
Yeah, it's basically this idea that our brains are really good at remembering unfinished tasks. They kind of nag at us until we complete them. So by starting even with something tiny, we're sort of tapping into that effect and using it to our advantage.
Ooh, that's fascinating.
Yeah. So I think that's a really great takeaway for anyone listening, right?
Mm.
Don't get bogged down by the enormity of the task. Just focus on taking that first minuscule step.
I love it. Small steps lead to big progress, right?
Exactly. And this leads us to another really important point, which is thinking about your environment. You mentioned earlier that sometimes you try to do your Duolingo in bed, right?
Oh, all the time.
So, and this is really common. We try to squeeze language learning into whatever little pockets of time we have.
Sure.
But our brains are very good at associating places with certain activities.
Right.
So if your bed is primarily a place where you relax and sleep,
Mm.
trying to suddenly switch into study mode there, it can actually create this kind of mental conflict.
It's like my brain sees the bed and it's like, time to chill. not conjugate verbs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why we often find ourselves getting sleepy or distracted when we try to study in bed, right?
Yeah.
Our brain's just not getting the right cues.
So what can we do about that?
Well, one of the things these experts really stressed was the importance of changing your environment to support your goals. And this doesn't have to be anything drastic. You don't need to build a whole new study.
Right.
Just simple things like moving to a desk or a table, or even just clearing off the clutter from your usual study space.
Like sending your brain a signal that it's time to focus.
Exactly. It's all about creating those mental associations like, okay, when I'm at this desk, it's French time.
Okay, so we've talked about starting small and changing our environment. What else can help us break free from this inertia?
So the next strategy that we found really interesting was all about reducing the number of decisions we have to make.
Hmm.
Because think about it. When it comes to language learning, there are so many choices to be made.
Oh, for sure. Which app to use, what to study, how long to study for. It's exhausting.
Exactly. That decision fatigue is real. You're mentally drained before you even start studying. So the suggestion was to plan your study sessions in advance, even the night before, and actually write it down.
Whoa.
So, like tomorrow at 7 p.m., I'm going to spend 10 minutes reviewing French greetings. Just something very specific.
So you wake up, you see your plan, and you just do it. No more hemming and hawing about what to study.
Exactly. It's about removing that friction, that resistance to starting.
I like it. And the last strategy that really stood out to me was about rewarding yourself. Like actually giving yourself a little treat after you finish a study session, even if it's just a short one.
Ah, yes, positive reinforcement. This is a really powerful technique for building habits. By giving yourself something enjoyable after you study, even something small like a piece of chocolate or a funny video, you start to create a positive association with the activity itself.
It's like you're training your brain to enjoy studying.
Right, exactly. You're making it more likely that you'll want to study again in the future.
Okay, so we have these 4 key strategies. Start small, change your environment, plan ahead, and reward yourself. And one thing that the materials we were looking at really emphasized was that it's not just about applying these strategies once in a while, it's about consistency.
Yes, it's about moving from a place of relying on motivation, which can be very fleeting, to building discipline.
So true. Motivation comes and goes, but discipline, that's what helps us stick with it, even when we don't feel like it.
Right. And, this brings us back to something we talked about earlier. Those tiny wins, those small steps, they really do matter.
Like practicing one French phrase might not seem like much.
But if you do that consistently, day after day, those phrases add up.
They become conversations. It's incredible.
It's amazing, right? It's this beautiful example of the compounding effect.
Small actions lead to big results.
Exactly. And so to kind of bring it all back to you and your French learning journey, if you've been feeling stuck or overwhelmed, just remember those 4 key ideas.
Start small, change your space, plan ahead, and reward yourself. And be kind to yourself along the way. Everyone has days when they just don't feel like studying.
It's true.
The important thing is not to get discouraged by those off days.
Just keep moving forward, even if it's just a little bit at a time.
Progress is progress, no matter how small.
So this brings up an interesting question for you. What's one tiny action you can take today, even in the next few minutes, based on what we've discussed?
Could you open your French textbook and just read one sentence?
Could you switch your phone's language settings to French for a few minutes?
Please, could you just take a moment and plan one small French activity for tomorrow?
Just pick one tiny thing and do it. Because when it comes to learning French and overcoming that feeling of being stuck, you've totally got this.
You absolutely do.